Hello everybody, this is Ian here, and welcome back to part 2 of my ranking, the missing Doctor Who serials, from those I want recovered the most to those I want recovered the least. Today we're taking a look at the second batch of stories, numbers 20 to 16. Again, this ranking is not necessarily in order of how much I like them, but that is definitely a factor, because a person is more likely to care if a story they like is recovered versus a story they don't like. Also remember that these are just my opinions, and I'm not trying to express them as fact. If you disagree with me, then put your thoughts in the comments below. Anyway, without further ado, the story I want recovered the 20th least is the William Hartnell story, Galaxy 4. And I feel bad putting this story so low because I don't think it's necessarily bad, but just when you compare it to most of the other missing serials, it is notably inferior. There just aren't very many bad Doctor Who stories, so even ones that are just okay, like say The Awakening, generally get really low rankings, even though they're not necessarily bad. With Galaxy 4, though, it's just kind of mediocre. The story itself is decent, but isn't anything especially unique. Yes, I know that this story is missing 3 of its 4 episodes, and that those missing episodes don't have any telesnaps, but I think that, of all the missing stories without telesnaps, Galaxy 4 definitely suffers the least from their absence, because the set pieces in the story are pretty minimal. There's the Draven spaceship, the real spaceship, and a handful of desert wasteland vistas. We have all 3 of these locations, and every character involved in the story from the existing Episode 3. This means that of all the missing stories with no telesnaps, save maybe the Invasion, Galaxy 4 is the only one whose missing episodes I think I can properly visualize from the extant Episode 3, and from the 6-minute clip surviving from Episode 1. And that visualization gives me a good feel for what this story would have felt like. Unfortunately, that feeling is also telling me, you know, this story would probably be pretty decent if it existed. Episode 3 is definitely the episode I enjoyed most from the story, and it is also the only episode in existence. I doubt that that is a coincidence. Nevertheless, while I think Galaxy 4 would definitely be reappraised if it were recovered, I still think it would be a pretty average story. We have a good idea of what this episode looked like, and a rough idea of what it might have felt like. And one of the episodes exists, and we have images of every character and set piece, so there isn't really anything that would be gained from recovering the missing episodes outside of having the episodes themselves. There are no famous scenes or performances, there are no characters and sets that are without any record, as is the case for other stories with no telesnaps, such as The Space Pirates and Mission to the Unknown. So, basically, Galaxy 4 is where it is, 20th, because it is mostly missing, has no telesnaps, and would probably be a pretty decent story to watch if it were recovered. Yet I can visualize it fairly well. The story itself is still inferior to that of other missing serials, and it can be told fairly well through reconstructions. Number 19, The Space Pirates. And as I speak about Galaxy 4 being inferior to other stories, we come to what is undoubtedly the worst missing serial in the show's history, and probably one of the worst stories, period. Despite this, however, it has somehow managed to beat out 7 other, better serials, over a fifth of the stories on this list. Allow me to explain why. The thing about The Space Pirates is that it's 6 episodes long. It's 6 episodes long, has no telesnaps, and we have only 1 surviving episode, and because of that, many extremely important characters, including the primary villain, are represented only by production stills, while others, like Lieutenant Sorba and Dama Sigri, have no surviving visual record whatsoever. We have no idea also what many of the sets looked like. All of this combines to make a story that is almost impossible to visualize, and that's really the reason it makes it up this high. Yes, the story is horribly, horribly boring, and I couldn't care less about the serial itself. It's just the sheer amount that's missing from this story that brings it up to 19th place. I can say that the serial itself would be bad even if the episodes existed, but the degree to which I can make that statement is completely unknown. The Space Pirates was supposedly a highly visual serial, which can't transfer the reconstructions, especially when there are no telesnaps. It's also important to note that this entire story was executed with such general incompetence and at such a cheap budget that, like the Underwater Menace, the Space Pirates definitely has a so bad it's good element to it. There's Gordon Gostello's Milo Clancy, old West-accented, flannel-wearing space prospector who, let's be honest, is kind of impossible not to love.
Last me nutty sliced bread, rubbishy newfangled solar toasters.
There's Madeline Sigri's space hair and her invisible wine. There's the set for Beacon Alpha 4 with all of its egg cartony glory. Then there's Ian Warren's Ice Lord helmet. General Hermack's weird, ever-changing accent.
We are going to be too late again!
And then there's that scene from episode 5 where there's like a 7-minute conversation where both parties are speaking in completely unintelligible accents. It's just one of those mind-melting moments that makes you reflect on what exactly you're doing with your life.
It's Milo! Hi, Darwin, it's old Milo, Darwin. Hey, come on, old fella. You sit down here where you're nice and comfortable. Now, there you are. Come on. Was that when little Madeline was born? Maggie? Yeah. Remember that? We made that record return trip. It took 'em.
The Space Pirates is full of these moments, and I think that most people would agree that even though the story itself is really, really, really boring, there is some enjoyment to be had out of it. And I legitimately believe that this serial, if it were recovered, would develop a serious cult following, even more than it has now. I'd really just like to see what this story looked like. Outside of that novelty factor, though, I find that there is very little incentive for recovering this story. The tedium far outweighs the enjoyment, and like the Underwater Menace, the Space Pirates is extremely boring. It is far from making the leap to so bad it's good. Yes, it's utterly impossible to visualize, but to be honest, there isn't really much to visualize in the first place. The biggest benefit its recovery would give to the Doctor Who community would be the fact that if a new viewer wanted to start the series in chronological order without watching any recons, they could start at the Crotons rather than the War Games, or if they don't mind animations, they could start with the Dominators, opening up an entire new season. Season 6 would also be tied with Season 2 for having the least episodes missing, but that's a fairly minor benefit. To summarize, The Space Pirates is 19th because it's really, really boring and is just a bad story in general. But the fact that it has only one episode surviving, has no telesnaps, and actually contains a few so bad it's good elements, brings it up to where it is. At the end of the day, The Space Pirates is one of those stories that I honestly just don't really care about. I understand why it was made. It was made as a budget saver for the War Games and to give the main cast a break, and I respect it for that. I'm glad it did it because it made the War Games so good. I don't think anyone really hates this story. I think it's just one that most people are just kind of apathetic towards. Number 18, The Wheel in Space. With this one, we move into episodes that I actively want recovered. Although I don't have a lot to say on this one specifically. The main reason why The Wheel in Space isn't higher is just because I think that I can get a good feel of the missing episodes from the two that we have. The two episodes are well spread out in the story, including episode 6, which usually has the most action in a serial, and we also have a middling episode of The Wheel in Space, episode 3, which helps to see exactly what kind of atmosphere the story builds. There are 3 other reasons why I want this story returned, though. The first is episode 1, where the famous pairing of Patrick Troughton and Fraser Hines get virtually an entire episode all to themselves, and I would love to see that. Also, the serial is Zoe's first, and we don't have episode 2, her first appearance, making her the only companion other than Jamie, Katarina, and Sarah Kingdom to have their introduction episode missing. This is ironic because Zoe actually has the best survival record of any companion after Ian, Barbara, and Susan. Finally, similar to Galaxy 4, The Wheel in Space is just not as good as some of the other missing stories. It's not bad, don't get me wrong, it's a strong serial, but it just pales in comparison to some of the others. It's also a bit generic, it's just another Troughton Cybermen story. So, overall, The Wheel in Space is 18th because it really is the least of the great missing serials. Like the Ice Warriors, it is middling in my ranking of classic serials and isn't really one that I go back to watch or would really care to go back to watch, but that isn't necessarily bad and definitely has some historical significance and entertainment. What The Wheel in Space really represents is the end of the Lost period, which extends from Galaxy 4 to The Wheel in Space, where missing episodes are the norm, not the exception. Number 17, The Web of Fear. Now, I became a Doctor Who fan in the summer of 2014, a few months after the Web Enemy announcement, so I have never known a world where The Web of Fear was missing more than one episode. But I can imagine it. It is a very sad place, especially considering it had probably the best censor footage of any missing story bar Fury from the Deep. And the Extant Episode 1 is probably one of the best Episode 1s the classic series ever produced, if not one of the best just singular episodes period that the classic series ever made. If only Episode 1 and that censor footage of The Web of Fear existed, The Web of Fear would be way higher on this list, but that is thankfully no longer the case. Rather, it is the opposite. Now only one episode is missing, Episode 3. The Web of Fear is an amazing story. That's the one thing I can say about it. It was a classic when it was missing, and it's a classic now. It's not my favorite Doctor Who story, even my favorite Patrick Troughton story, but it's definitely in my top 20 classic stories, and for a show as long-running and as consistently good as classic Doctor Who, that's saying something. The Web of Fear is very good, and that's the reason it's so sad that this story is incomplete. In the last video, I said that I didn't need the 10th Planet Episode 4 recovered because I didn't see the story as an absolute classic that needed to be completed. The Web of Fear, though, is. The Web of Fear is a classic that needs to be completed, but not necessarily for the fans. Yes, it's tragic that Episode 3 is missing, and missing because of the reason that it is. Seriously, why couldn't the Enemy of the World Episode 3 have been stolen? You know, because we already had that one. But I can perfectly visualize the Web of Fear from the existing 5 episodes, probably better than any other missing story. And Episode 3 of the Web of Fear is also probably the least important episode of the entire serial. It's the running through tunnels episode, and the episode where the exposition is given again for any people who missed the first episode. Yes, I know Episode 3 is the first appearance of Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart, but that's about the only thing notable about it. Now, if Episode 4 had been missing, things would be quite different. But as things stand, I don't think that Episode 3's being missing adversely affects my enjoyment of the serial, especially if an animation were released one day. The story is strong enough that it can power through those 24 minutes of recon without getting boring. This story needs to be completed for those who do not watch the classic series, the new Whovians and the non-Whovians, because The Web of Fear is one of the best introductory stories of the entire classic series because it defies the stereotypes of the era. People say that the acting is terrible.
I've got to see the surface, Mary. I've got to. I want to see the sun again. Walk on top of the earth.
Not in The Web of Fear. People say that the sets are wobbly and overlit. Not in The Web of Fear. People say that the monsters are cheap and laughable. Well, I guess the Yetis aren't exactly the most intimidating of the enemies the Doctor's ever faced based on appearance alone, but they're about on par with the best the classic series turned out, and probably better than basically anything in the 70s and 80s. Quick tangent. Why is it that Doctor Who effects seem to get gradually worse as the series progressed? Like, take a look at this Sensorite from Episode 1, and at this Cheetah person from Season 26. Regardless of your opinion on the stories themselves, it is undeniable that the Sensorite effects hold up to this day. One of the best designed aliens, at least in appearance, that the show has ever made, classic or modern. Now contrast this with the Cheetah people, who look like exactly what they are, people in giant furry suits. They're far from the worst thing the show ever produced, but they are noticeably inferior to the Sensorite design. And I think a lot of other people have pointed this out, but I think that the reason why the black and white episodes have seemingly better production values than a lot of the color episodes is just because they're in black and white covers a lot. Anyway, back to The Web of Fear. I really want it completed because it is a great story to introduce people to the classic series, as most newbies aren't going to want to sit through a recon, even if it's only one episode. So, overall, The Web of Fear is at 17th place because it is an excellent story that would serve as a perfect starting point for new fans. Simultaneously, though, The Web of Fear is also only missing one episode, and I can perfectly visualize that episode through a recon, and Episode 3's being missing doesn't affect my enjoyment of the serial as a whole. There are just too many other stories that are both missing more and impossible to visualize that Web of Fear can't get any higher on this list. Number 16, The Celestial Toymaker. This serial is up here for one reason, and one reason only. It is almost 100% action-driven, meaning that it works worse as a reconstruction than nearly any other serial in the show's history. Yes, Episode 4 allows me to effectively visualize the missing episodes, but with no telesnaps, it is still extremely difficult and not as good a visualization as it could be. It is literally impossible to fully enjoy the story as a reconstruction, and arguably suffers more from being missing than any other missing serial. However, the narrative is still terrible, so it can't get any higher than 16th place. I mean, seriously, just take a look at how this thing is structured. First off, the entire storyline of Dodo and Steven has no bearing on the development of the story. The trials they go through are completely arbitrary and could be rearranged, cut, or replaced with complete impunity. You could delete episodes 2 and 3 completely and the plot would remain exactly the same. This is probably one of the reasons why it's so easy to visualize, because all the episodes are basically the same. Basically, you could have an unlimited number of different games that they play and just keep the story going on forever, and the overall plot would remain exactly the same. Really, I think the only reason anyone remembers this story is because it's based on such a brilliant concept, and because Michael Galf is just fantastic as the charismatic and titular Toymaker. I will say, however, that this serial would probably work better as an animation than any other, just because of how weird and uncanny valley the whole thing is. In fact, this serial might actually be improved from the actual prints as an animation if a good quality enough one were made. Such an animation, I think, could kick this serial significantly lower in my rankings of missing serials I want returned. The only other story I think that could even be slightly improved by being an animation is the Mind Robber, which thankfully exists. So overall, the Celestial Toymaker, though it is missing 3 out of its 4 episodes and impossible to fully enjoy as a recon, is just too weak of a story to get any higher, and I can visualize the missing episodes fairly well. And there is a difference between how well you can visualize a story and how much you can enjoy it. Visualization is aesthetics, atmosphere, direction, style, and the visual appearance of characters and set pieces, whereas enjoyment deals with how well a story translates to a reconstruction. In the case of the Celestial Toymaker, production stills in the existing episode allow me to visualize the missing episodes, what they look like, but the story's extremely action-based plot translates poorly to a reconstruction, allowing me to not fully enjoy it. But that's it for this episode. Join me next time where we cross the halfway point of our list and prepare to delve into the top 10. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time.